Hello, everyone. Welcome to a live session of the Gateway Spotlight. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts. I am coming to you live from Kansas City, Missouri, right here in Middle America. So I'd love to know where all of you are tuning in from. Please say hello in the chat. Also, let us know where you work and how excited you are to nerd out on a little history of education abroad at the University of Delaware. I'm just going to do a quick introduction of the topic today. Again, welcome. My name is Brooke Roberts. I'm the host of this show, and I'm also the founder of Inside Study Abroad and director of partner marketing at Podium Education. So today we're highlighting the University of Delaware's 100-year history in education abroad. The university launched its first education abroad program in 1923, sending a small group of students to France for their junior year abroad. We're going to discuss that and how the tradition of global education has grown and evolved over the last century at the University of Delaware. And of course, I have to spend a little moment here thanking today's sponsor. If you guys aren't aware, this show is powered by some amazing organizations that support us to bring this content to you for free. And so today we want to thank CEA Kappa Education Abroad for sponsoring this particular episode. CEA Kappa Education Abroad offers high-impact study and internship abroad experiences that inspire and challenge students to explore complex cultural and social landscapes across 22 destinations in 13 countries. Their focus is academic quality and high-impact practices that prepare students personally and professionally to excel tomorrow. They consider student well-being the foundation of a successful experience, and CEA Kappa is committed to increasing equitable access to education abroad while providing students a framework to explore and challenge their identities, both through diverse global communities as well as the students we bring together. Thank you so much, CEA Kappa, for sponsoring today's episode. If you want to learn more about CEA Kappa and the evolution of that organization, go to ceakappa.com to learn more. I want to introduce today's guest on the show, and it's Matthew Drexler, the Director of Study Abroad at the University of Delaware. A little bit
Thanks,
about
Brooke.
Matt has spent more than 14 years facilitating international exchange and collaboration, including previously serving as Assistant Director for International Student Engagement at Delaware and as a program officer in Philadelphia under the auspices of the Department of State International Visitor Leadership Program. Matt is currently working on his EDD with a focus on the international student experience in higher education. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have a lot to cover. We had 100 years to get through, and we only have about half an hour-ish. But to give us a little context, if we're talking about the history of education abroad at the University of Delaware, why don't you share a little bit about your specific history? How did you get started as a professional in international ed?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. We're really excited to be able to talk about this 100-year history. My thanks also to the sponsors. CA Kappa is a big partner of the University of Delaware. So our thanks to them for helping to pull this event together. And I see many familiar faces in the participant list. So hello to everybody. My own journey in study abroad started with a exchange program. I was a Rotary international exchange student when I was in high school. My junior year of high school, I spent a year living and studying in Brazil, learning Portuguese by language immersion. And it was that single year experience that inspired me for a lifetime. I think I'm still working to achieve some of the goals and idealistic young dreams that I had back when I was 16 and living in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. I continued on with that trend through college. I went to Juniata College where I studied peace and conflict studies. I studied abroad twice for my junior year. I spent a semester in Sevilla in Spain and another semester in Szombathely, Hungary. I was lucky enough to be able to go back to that same institution in Hungary to do my graduate degree. And then, I found myself at the University of Delaware about 5 years into my career after having worked on State Department professional level exchange programs. I think it just rang true with me that I wanted to share and inspire other students to take on the study abroad experience and to step outside their comfort zone. What changed my life and hopefully could have the same impact for others. And it's really an idealistic enterprise for me. I still think that we can change the world. I think we are changing the world. I think we have changed the world, and really proud to be part of such a fantastic industry with such a great mission. I started at UD about 11 years ago as a program coordinator for study abroad. I made the switch and worked on the other side for a little while where I did international student engagement work. and then came back to the study abroad team after the pandemic to help restart the program. And I've been in the position for the past 2.5 years now.
That's awesome. I love hearing that story. I love hearing how you got started so young. I think more and more students today are getting a little taster even before they get to college, and which is, I think, makes our work a little bit easier at convincing them why they need to go. So let's dive into the history of education abroad at the University of Delaware. And so, for our audience, in case there's any historians who really can go deep on the facts and figures of the history of higher education or international education globally or in the US, just keep in mind that we're really focused on the University of Delaware's experience here. And what was going on at University of Delaware may not have been true at other institutions. And neither of us are claiming to be scholars and experts on the history as well. We'll do our best. And please chime into the chat if you have more context or points of view and perspectives you'd love to bring to the table, but also just be gentle with us. Let's talk about that first program, 1923. Take us, what was going on at the university? What was the spark for that first program? And tell us a little bit about how it was structured.
So a little bit of framing. I think that the concept for the program started well before 1923, of course. The spark was one faculty member, Professor Raymond Kirkbride. He was a faculty member in the Department of Languages, Literatures, and Cultures here at the University of Delaware, a department that still has a really strong tradition of study abroad at our institution. He was a World War I veteran, and he found himself in the interwar period studying at the University of Grenoble in 1919, dreaming about potentially bringing some students back to Europe to have a similar experience. He came home from that. He got himself in front of the desk of then University President Walter Houlihan, for whom the Central University Administrative Building is named today, and convinced President Houlihan that his idea had merit and that the concept of the plan would work. And Professor Houlihan bought into the idea, and they started on a campaign to garner support. To pull the program off, they built an office. So they built the university's first foreign study plan office, where they began to work out the details of that first experience. They ultimately left on July 7th, 1923, aboard a ship, and spent the academic year in France, where they studied a language and culture program. They started off with the first month or so of their program in Nancy, where they took language immersion courses and got familiar with French culture, and then moved to Paris, where they enrolled in courses at the Sorbonne and spent time integrated into the classrooms of French students. There's a lot of exciting and interesting detail, things that sort of resonate with the way that study abroad offices run even today. The impact of the program was important from the beginning. President Houlihan really felt that the program of that nature would be worthwhile across the United States. It would allow students to experience economic, cultural, commercial, political growth that they wouldn't have seen in the United States. It would train a cohort of students to be stronger language instructors and influential folks in politics and international relations. So it was very much a career-oriented and outcome-oriented initiative from the very beginning. There were 8 participants, all men, on that first program, and the whole plan quickly grew. So between 1923 and 1944, the program sent about 902 students on the study abroad academic year abroad in France. The program was expanded to sites in Germany and Switzerland throughout that first generation of study abroad. And yeah, it had an impact that rings through our halls today. We have Professor Kirkbride hanging in our lobby downstairs, and faculty are still a critical component to everything we do in study abroad. And there's plenty more facts here.
Why don't you go ahead and share your screen and show us some never before seen photos from the archives. He told me before we started recording earlier today that this is the first time that the university is leaning into talking about this 100-year history. They have a big activities happening this summer. And so some of these things that they've worked with the archivists to bring forward haven't actually been displayed anywhere, at least not online. And so we're the first ones to get to see it. So that's very exciting. So why don't you run through these photos, and we'll talk through them and talk about context and things as we progress.
So first photo, first group. This was the 8 students and Professor Kirkbride that left for France on July 7th, 1923. Professor Kirkbride is there in the middle. And I think this is so interesting because we quickly click ahead in time. This is them when they arrived in France. You couldn't even imagine our students wearing suit and tie and those kind of hats today, but
Yeah.
This was the nature of travel at the time. The program was supported by an office, a University of Delaware office that was set up, a bureau that was set up in Paris where they were able to host delegations. And so the host families and the folks that lived with and supported the program were from the high society in France, aristocrats and folks who had international relations experience with the United States. In fact, to enable the first program and gain entry into France, the university president and Professor Kirkbride gained the support of the U.S. Department of Commerce. The Secretary of Commerce at the time was Herbert Hoover. So we had federal government support to enable and facilitate their entire experience abroad for these first 8 students, which then turned into, by 1927, a really diverse group of students. The sort of demographic of the students studying abroad switched to what we're more familiar with today, which is more women than men. I think that had a lot to do with the framing of the experience and the fact that students in those majors, a lot of them targeted towards French teachers and future French language educators who were largely women, informed and influenced the demographics of those travel study groups. So by 1926, you saw large and diverse groups of students, by some standards of diversity, studying abroad through UD.
I'm curious, another logistical question. How much did the program cost out of pocket for students?
That's a really good question.
I
I
guess
can tell you,
probably a
but
better question is like, how much was it
yeah,
in proportion to what it cost at the time to
yeah,
go
no,
to university?
it was certainly an expensive experience, and it was interesting to see the setup as well. They actually sent the university administrator who did the accounting for the program along with the group, and that office to run the accounting and run the books for the program was based out of that accountant's home in London. So he would tag along on the ship, get dropped off in London, where he would keep the books for the program, and the group would continue on to France for their experience. It was an expensive program. You think of what was going on at the time, things like the Great Depression. So the students who were able to go on the program were certainly affluent. I mean, could afford the higher sticker price. I do have the actual number somewhere that I can put in the chat once we get
Okay.
a chance a little later on.
I think that would be interesting to see, especially the cost of it in proportion to the cost of attendance, because I know that that's also a hot button topic today and how students are paying for education abroad experiences and how that compares to what they pay at home. So let's
So
continue through these photos.
this is one of my favorites because I think the importance of collaboration and study abroad is critical. And in this photo, which I think is dated 1927-28, this is the 1927-28 cohort from the University of Delaware. And you can see here everyone holding the pennants from their home universities. So in an age where there were not study abroad providers like our friends at CEA Kappa, the University of Delaware program served as one of the places that students could enroll to gain a foreign study experience. And throughout that first generation, students from 127 different institutions studied through the University of Delaware Foreign Study Plan and spent their junior year abroad as representatives from, you can see here, Dartmouth, Lafayette, Colgate, Syracuse, Boston, Wellesley, fantastic mix of different universities. So Professor Kirkbride and his network of faculty friends from around the country helped spread the word and attracted students from all around to join the University of Delaware cohorts.
That's so cool. I just want to address a comment. Tony Ogden mentioned Bruce LeBrac in his work has talked about at the time when they traveled by ship, it gave students that space to, especially upon return, to really start unpacking and dissecting and reflecting on their experience. But I'm sure that happened on both ends. If you think about students today, when they're going through our pre-departure orientation, even if it's a series of events and workshops, they're doing it along with all their other classes, working a job, maybe have family obligations, all these things going on. Could you imagine if we had a full month where all they could focus on was preparing for their time abroad, or a whole month to prepare to come home and that's all they could focus on? That would really change the game in terms of how deeply students can really
It would.
reflect and leverage
I,
the experience later.
I think that would be a dream for a lot of us in the room today. That would be
Yeah.
a fantastic experiment to see what we could get out of students if we had that much lead time to help them prepare. The groups, because they had to go to New York to board the ship, would head up and meet up in New York about a week ahead of time so that they could go through nearly a week-long pre-departure orientation process and finish up shopping and buying all the gifts that they would need to take along with them before they departed.
We'll talk about this as well in terms of global and national events that and how it impacted education abroad at Delaware. It's very clear, and it's true today, the affluence of the participants. who were going to get to go. I know you have some photos coming up and from the 1930s, and students were still going abroad. And you mentioned that the numbers actually increased during that time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I added this photo from 1931 just for that point. The size of the groups continued to grow throughout that first generation of study abroad programs. And despite global events, despite financial strains on folks in the United States and around the world, the interest in the program continued to grow. I think excitement around the program was always there. And much like us today, the office, when you read some of the letters and some of the archives that we have here, was dedicated to solving that program. So risk management and contingency planning were a part of the process from the beginning. Fun fact, and perhaps one of the reasons why that was so important at the time, this is the age before internet, before high-speed communications. And so the students were writing letters home. And you're right, when you look at some of the images of them on the ships, they had a ton of time to get ready, even just in transit. There's pictures of them on the ship playing shuffleboard, and you can sense this energy of anticipation and excitement as they looked out at the sea, wondering when they were going to see land and what might happen to them when they arrived. You see the faculty members smoking their cigarettes on the side of the ship, and it just gives you this really great picture. We'll bring some of that footage along with us to NASA. So if anybody's going to be there, that'd be another place to come see a little bit more. But it just gives you that really tangible, relatable picture of what they must have gone through. And then throughout the program, it was set up so that women were allowed to write home twice a month, while men were only allowed to write home once a month.
It
Maybe.
blows my mind. It blows my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. It's
Amazing.
really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
But tailoring the support services and the experiences to different demographics within the program, I think there was probably some reason behind all of that, even though it
Yeah.
seems a little silly.
Well, I think it's interesting too that it wasn't just, hey, let him go to France. Good luck. There was still some thought put into structuring and making it intentional about these decisions that are made in where they land and how much time they spent in each place, which I think you're going to get into in a minute, and how that was very intentional, and how even today we have to be very intentional about how we structure a program to make sure students are getting as much out of it as we hope they can. That's always been true, it sounds
It has been. And I
like.
think the next one here, next couple of photos here are about some of that experience that the students had that was built for them, that was designed again by faculty leaders, which I think is a really important part of the story, that it wasn't directors like me designing his experience. It was the academic leaders of the university that were putting these experiences together. As I mentioned, the program started off with a pre-departure orientation, and then the first month to 2 months of the program, depending on the year and location, were spent on language immersion, language learning, and courses on culture. So they would learn from local faculty and from UD faculty to prepare themselves for the actual academic experience, which started up a little bit later into the programs. In fact, although they were integrated into the classroom and taking courses at the Sorbonne, for the French example, with French students, the French faculty did grade them and they got their credential from the University of Sorbonne, but the grade that came back to UD was the one that was transcribed by our faculty. So in the same way today that we would take the foreign transcript and apply the grade conversion chart and enter them in our systems here, the same process was happening back then. A little bit more manual, of course, but while they were integrated into these sorts of classrooms, learning French language, civilization, culture, and politics, and being graded there, they were receiving credit for their program back home. And that's when we talk about first, that's really one of the things that we like to clarify, that it was the first program for credit. And then cultural experiences, cultural learning, stepping outside of your comfort zone to, for example, participate in a theater group led by students and in collaboration with local students was also a part of the experience. So through the office that the University of Delaware had in France, or later on in Geneva, they were able to build out these deliberate experiences for students to experience France from different angles and to, as students like to do, jump in and do it rather than spending their whole time in the classroom. So there was always that experiential component to the calendar and the syllabus of the whole program. Let's see. So this one of my favorites. Just as I mentioned, that experience of everyone on the ship and this being the excitement of departure. and the transition to the mostly female cohorts that we saw later on in the program. The experience of the Second World War had a big impact on the end of the program. So I think much like our students today, in my tenure here at the University of Delaware, I know we've dealt with everything from volcanoes in Iceland to terrorist attacks all around the world to COVID-19. And so for them, it was the rise of the Second World War that really ended the first generation of travel study. Here you see the students in front of a monument in France that was for victims of World War I. So you can imagine Professor Kirkbride taking his students back to a site like this to tell that piece of history that he experienced. And then it wasn't long after until the students were recalled from abroad as the rise of Hitler and Nazi Germany took over and made it impossible or too risky for our students to be able to participate in programs. President Houlihan, who helped start the first program, also closed the program in 1944 in 1944, they officially closed the office. This clipping is from 1938 when they talked about the rise of Hitler in Germany and how it wouldn't be possible to send students there anymore. The other clip, the students talking on the radio, they're just two newspaper clippings that I had, but I just find that enchanting because they're hosting a webinar, right?
Basically,
A
yeah.
radio show on the
A
topic
student
of what
panel.
American
Yeah.
students gain in France. Yeah, a question
Yeah.
that I think is still relevant today as we think about how the whole industry shifted from these year-long study abroad programs. Actually, in the summer of 1924, and many of the first programs for other universities were shorter summer programs. So there were a range of program formats nationwide in those first 2, 3, 4 years. It wasn't all just junior year study abroad, but what impact was this experience having on the students was a question from the beginning. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, one last photo here, which I love, is just a little before and after of how we continue the tradition to this day. And our students, I think, greet the experience with the same sense of wonder and excitement that the original group would have had in 1923.
Wow. That's amazing. I don't know. My mind, when he showed me these photos earlier, I was just so giddy and excited to hear some of this history. So thank you so much for walking us through all of those. I do want to talk more about, I know that you weren't even alive, so you wouldn't necessarily know what were those conversations happening in those closed door meetings. But I'm curious with World War II, you mentioned before, actually I think before we started recording, that education abroad actually didn't return to the University of Delaware until the 70s, I believe you said. And I'm curious
That's right.
if there's been any discussion or there's archives to showcase like what took so long? Why was it obviously it's World War II, but what other things were going on that made them say it's not time to bring it back yet? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I do. It's a personal institutional story. So I think it may be unique in this long pause in the middle, I guess the second generation of our history, the second 25-year period of the history. The university turned a little bit inward. It was the interest of then university presidents to focus on serving the state and serving our role as a sea and land grant institution. So I think there was a heavy emphasis on making sure the university was serving the state of Delaware and industry in the region to make sure that they were producing students that could serve the needs of the regional economy. So I think that was really the main
Yeah.
frame for it. And I think
Yeah.
it was a format change to the university calendar in 1974 that added the winter session, J term, back into our calendar that allowed the current tradition to establish itself when faculty began taking students for short-term programs in the J term, 1974. And that's really been our strength ever since.
But I think geopolitically, I think after World War II, the United States just generally became very isolationist and, like you said, very insular and looking inward. And so I'm just making some guesses here. I would love to hear from the audience as well
Yeah.
your thoughts on this. And I imagine Delaware, along with a lot of institutions, they were really focused on serving their state and their local communities, but also all the GIs returning who are now getting access to higher education through the GI Bill. And so there was a lot of like infrastructure and foundation that had to be built just to even support all those returning soldiers back to the United States. And we talk about just, I'm going to nerd out real quick, but we talk about higher education in general evolving after World War II. That's when like on campus housing and all those cinder block dorm rooms that are mostly been torn
Yeah,
down now and
that's right.
replaced by beautiful resort style dorms. But those are all were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s to accommodate this influx of students. So after World War II, now you go into the 70s, but there's lots of like strife happening in the United States. You get the civil rights movement in the 60s, obviously Vietnam War and the backlash of that into the 70s. I'm curious with internal US based strife, what was I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? The response or reaction to those things in terms of how global ed fit into responding to those things happening.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it goes a little bit beyond just study abroad in that part of the story. So I think
Right.
at the University of Delaware, that from 1974 onward is really a story of the global folks on campus, the international education focus groups on campus, leaning into some of those global dynamics. And one of my favorite stories is the number of students that came to the University of Delaware during the Cold War as we did outreach to Russia to try to establish public diplomacy programs and share language learning and build relations between our two countries and bring down that Cold War mentality. I think it probably had some effect on the global dynamics. And I think in the field of study abroad, again, someone with a better sense of history can chime in here, but I know that I've watched and felt the evolution of the justification and the impact of study abroad being reframed several times throughout my 15 years in the field. And when I started, it was a big conversation about our impact on national security, right? You're looking at the post
I know.
9/11 days
9/11.
where study abroad can help us build a more fluent and the more global citizens that we educate, the larger our contribution to national security can be. I think that frame has faded away a little bit, and other frames, diversity, equity, inclusion frames, multiculturalism frames have carried us more recently. So I think it is a long history. Again, someone else might have to better articulate the various frames that we've worked through, but we certainly are good at shifting our justifications and the way we talk about our programs and the impact that we have on students and on higher education in general, according to what's happening in the world. And I think that's important. That's a big part of our role, is to lean into the moment and see how we can contribute, whether it be towards ways to bring about peace or create security or build wellness or develop global citizens. They all are in the same interest of having a positive impact on the world.
I think I love that you brought up that in 15 years, you've seen so many shifts. I know in my 22 years, I've also seen a lot of shifts. I'm sure everyone in the chat who's maybe been around even longer has seen a lot of those shifts. I think I think what I love about us working in the field as professionals is that we have to flex those muscles that we hope to grow in students when they go abroad, that flexibility, that adaptability, that ability to change and morph our perspective as the world around us changes and morphs. And I think oftentimes people have been around a long time. We often have to be reminded, like, just because it's always been done that way doesn't mean that's always how it should be done. And that we have to be open to the change and evolution of what the field could look like, because it looks nothing like 1923 experience that we've witnessed today. So I think that's a really, I think, good lesson we can all take from looking at where it began at University of Delaware. I want to leave some time for questions. So those of you who are hanging with us and are loving this, if you have any specific questions about the evolution of education abroad at the University of Delaware specifically, if you want to make some comments, please share them over in the chat, or there might be a question area somewhere. I'm not sure. Or if you'd like to raise your hand and have some commentary you'd like to share, please go ahead and do that now. And I'm just going to bring up one more question for Matt before we close this out. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Matt, for being here. So let's talk a little bit about, we have this history, and I think history is so important to framing where we are now and also where we're going. So I'm curious now, like with the University of Delaware, you're looking at this 100-year history, but you're also having to think about the students of today and the students of tomorrow and the nature of our world and how it exists now. And we talk about program design and structures going from junior year down to 10-day faculty led programs and everything in between. But now we're talking about digital programs and augmented reality and AI and all these other new, I don't know, new cultures, new worlds to explore, if you will. And I'm curious what you're excited about as the director of the programs at UDEL and also what you're thinking about as an institution when it comes to these new frontiers.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic question. And I'm gonna go back just one step to the question of cost, because I think that's
Yeah.
where maybe we can, add in a component here that the first study abroad program costs students $740 US. Right.
Oh,
So
can
I
somebody
think
do a quick Google search and figure out how much that is in
what's the
today's money?
yeah, how much is that today? Yeah, that's a good question.
$740. Okay.
Yeah, $740 for the 10-month long experience.
Wow.
And yeah,
And
so
that
I think,
includes, sorry, can I just clarify? Do you know if that included everything, like the boat transfer and housing, or is that just tuition? Oh, it's everything.
it
Okay.
included, yeah, the
All
Delaware
right.
fee, tuition abroad, private lessons, books,
Wow.
homestays, ocean passage, passport, French visa, and some excursions. Same budget model we use today. But I think whatever that comes out to be in modern dollars, I'm sure it's going to be less than some of the price tags we see on our programs today. And I think when you mention things like AI, or maybe in some of our strategic conversations, we talk about things like COIL programs and other formats for study abroad that might impact the cost. I do think that's one of the top priorities for folks, for institutions, is to address the incredibly high cost of study abroad. And for those of us in the field, there you go, $13,000
Yeah. Yeah. About
today's
13. Yeah.
value.
Thank you, everybody. I was looking at it too. I had to know. 13 grand.
Yeah,
That's
which
still cheaper than a lot of our programs
is
today. Like you couldn't do a semester abroad program these days for 13K. There's a few, but wow. Wow.
maybe 13K of just the program fee, add in the plane tickets and everything else.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a lot more
so
expensive.
so
Yeah.
crazy. Okay, sorry, continue.
No, and so I think that kind of question of availability, accessibility, and affordability is something that we really need to have in mind as we move forward and think about the next generation. I think that matches the frame of the, year old students who are enrolling in our universities next fall, that they are looking to know what outcomes and impacts and things they'll gain through these experiences. So finding ways to continue to assess and evaluate what we do. Are here at UD, for example, we test every student before and after their study abroad experience using an instrument which I could send to everybody afterwards. That is called the Global Engagement Measure, that assesses things like tolerance for ambiguity and openness to diversity, local site knowledge and cultural knowledge, that helps us frame their experience in both the academic and university context, but in the personal impact context. I think the other thing we really need to focus on are some of the more broader strategies around global at university. So here at UD, we have a global impact strategy that we focus on, that helps us justify and work with the academic departments and folks around campus on integrating global learning experiences into the curriculum. So it's not just the extracurricular activity or the extra experience only open to a few students, but that it's a critical component of all academic programs. And we have some tools to study abroad. Maybe the oldest and most traditional tool for helping to internationalize the student experience. But for example, we have a program here at UD called the World Scholars Program. It's a 4-year comprehensive internationalized program for undergraduate students who come to the University of Delaware. They're admitted into the program, much like they would be to our honors college. They spend their first semester freshman year at one of our 4 partner sites. They go to Madrid, Rome, Athens, or Auckland, where they spend their freshman first semester abroad. They return to campus and then continue on a 4-year plan that includes enrolling in a globally focused major or minor. It includes an undergraduate research requirement that is part of the culminating final capstone project that they put together. It requires a second study abroad experience, which students can do in any format, where they could go on one of our faculty-led short-term programs, or they could string together a whole year abroad. They can find something on their own and go outside the university as well. In that experience, they need to gain an additional experiential learning component, such as an internship or a volunteer experience that they can integrate into their undergraduate research. And then they finish in 4 years with a globally focused major or minor, 2 study abroad experiences, and a portfolio of undergraduate research and experiential learning lines on their resume that really make them competitive in the job market, help them fully understand themselves in the global context. And I think that's the kind of building of a global citizen that we need to think about. It's that
Yeah.
longer term thinking, that fully comprehensive thinking that's a little bit more strategic than just how do I fit in my study abroad experience?
Yeah. No, I think I know that I personally, if I had gone to University of Delaware, I would have loved that kind of program. I would have been the first to sign up. I think what I love about the evolution of what we've seen clearly in terms of our focus on who's participating and who's getting access to these types of intercultural learning is that fully integrated experience is amazing and beautiful for those who can, but that's still not going to welcome in other students. I know that University of Delaware, you also really focus on those short-term faculty-led experiences that are obviously much more accessible to students. And is that like a strategic decision to have that fully integrated experience, that junior year abroad with the global scholar or sorry, world scholars, and then also having, I think I read 80 faculty-led programs. I may have misquoted.
Yeah, no, it ranges year to year, 60 to 80 different faculty led programs each year. We might be the reverse of some other schools where the faculty led component is our strength. So since
Mm,
1974, that's been the core of our study abroad program here at UD. So adding something like the World Scholars program to expand options and give students that more comprehensive 4-year option is very strategic.
50.
And it's part
Yeah.
of making sure that there is a, and I think the other thing that we talk about here a lot and don't necessarily have an answer for, but it's certainly a problem we're working on day to day, is blurring the lines between the study abroad versus international student and scholar services dichotomy that's part of our industry. They're all international students and they're all studying abroad. And the programs that our
Yeah.
international student and scholar team have to prepare students to make the adjustment to life in the United States, you could take the same titles, flip them around, and use them for the pre-departure orientation that we run for our study abroad students.
Right.
And the fact that our university is a truly global university, it's a hub for innovation, for faculty and academic activity. It's a hub for students to intersect with folks from all around the world, from all around the country, from all different backgrounds, is the critical University of Delaware experience that everyone has to have. So it's not necessarily that they need to go on a study abroad program that we need to be thinking about, but I have another program. It's called the Delaware Diplomat Program. It's meant to be a scholarship program for students to earn some money for study abroad before they travel by going to global events on campus. So if they go to the Fulbright lecture series, or if they go to the Friday International Coffee Hour, if they meet with a student from the English language program, they gain some points towards their study abroad program. Even if
Excellent.
that's not enough funding to help enable them to go on a study abroad program, we hope that it would give them that global learning experience through all the engagement that they can do right here on our campus. I think that the concept in the literature would be internationalization at home, that we need to think about that component of the international experience for our students in addition to, or as an alternative to, study abroad, and maybe expanding our scope of thinking a little bit beyond just the travel component.
Yeah. I think that coming back to when I was talking about the digital and the AI and the augmented reality, that component, virtual experiences, I think that's where I think we are starting to be open to the idea of blurring the line between you either move around the globe or you don't. And if you don't, it's bad. And so I think that we're having more of those conversations. There is more innovation happening where we can start saying, how do we utilize all of these great tools to and resources and technology to mirror the learning that might take place when you go abroad, which is never guaranteed either when they go abroad. So that's also something to keep in mind. I wanted to just highlight some of the chatter in the chat here. We have James Pasquill. I hope I said your name correctly. He talked about, it would have been fascinating or would be fascinating to find some of those early participants and ask them how the experience has changed their life trajectories and attitudes. I'm curious, is there any kind of project or has there been a project over the years at Delaware to get some interviews collected from those as early participants as you can find?
Yes, we started outreach last year to try to find some of those folks. We found some very early participants and some of their family members. There's additional information coming into the archives. The refrain is what we all love to hear and could expect, that it changed their lives, one of their favorite experiences of their lives, and that they see the world differently to this day because of it. I think that's something that I'll hold back on just a bit because we hope to actually share those stories and articulate
Okay.
them both at NASA and in some publications to
Yeah.
follow. So
Okay.
I wouldn't be doing it
It's a
justice to try to
teaser.
tell
Yeah.
the full
This
story
is
now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
But,
just the teaser.
um,
That's great.
you
So
know,
can you tell us, for those of you people who might be heading to NASA in, gosh, a month or so, what are you doing? What's the University of Delaware doing at NASA where they can maybe come look at some archives, find some more information? Can you share a little bit about that? And then we'll have to wrap
yeah.
it up.
Yes, please join us at NAFSA. We have a booth in the expo hall, so we'll be right across from the NAFSA pavilion. So pretty front and center in the expo hall. Shouldn't be hard to find us at all. Yeah, we'll be bringing along archives. We hope to set up again, the details are still being finalized, but we hope to have the setup for a storytelling booth. We would invite all of you to come and record your story. You think NPR
Oh,
StoryCorps style
yeah.
chance to share your experience and tell the impact of study abroad on your lives, on your career, messages that you'd like to send out to other students or to future students. We'll collaborate with some of our partners to string that together and share as video at the conference. You'll see us on some of the big screens throughout. There's a 60-second video before the plenary sessions where you'll hear a little bit more of the history. If we're lucky, you might even hear from our most famous alumni, President Biden. Hopefully will
Ooh.
chime in on that video. So fingers crossed that
Yeah.
he'll join us at least virtually for that part of it. We're collaborating with the Embassy of France to host the reception over there to commemorate the fact that the first program went to France. And I think there will be, again, we can share details with the Gateway group, but there'll be a session on Thursday that will focus on the story of study abroad and turn the corner and talk about what kinds of ideas do we have as a field to impact the next generation of study abroad, and how can we leverage this celebration of 100 years of impact on higher education to influence our organizations and make international education and study abroad even more central than it already is.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being here and chiming into the chat. And Matt, thank you so much for sharing all this great history and context for this 100-year celebration. Congratulations to you and the university on pulling all of this great information together. Hey, you're part of the history now. Just accept it. So, a lot of resources and information have been dropped in the chat, which is wonderful. We're going to send out all these resources as part of the show notes for this show. So make sure you're on the Gateway International Group newsletter where you'll receive all of those. And we'll make sure they're in the show notes wherever you're watching or listening to this episode. And also, I just want to do a quick teaser for everyone who's still here for our next Gateway Spotlight. Actually, Tony Ogden, Dr. Anthony Ogden is going to be guest hosting our next episode. And he's going to have an amazing guest to talk about the topic of pathway to citizenship for international students, which is a very hot topic right now. So I know you probably have a lot of opinions. And so that's going to be a really great interview as well coming up soon. And make sure you're on the newsletter to get all those details when we have them prepared as well. And yeah, so thank you again, Matt. It's great to meet you. I feel like now we're fast friends and we
Likewise.
can have a beer and geek
Absolutely.
out on history of international ed together when we meet up. And thank you all for being here. And we will see you in another episode real soon. Thanks, everyone.